The boy stood outside the glass doors of the diner, his face pale and thin, eyes wide as he stared at the plates of food being carried out to customers. His clothes were worn, an oversized hoodie with fraying cuffs, jeans that were a little too short, sneakers that had seen far better days. His name was Ethan, and at only 11 years old, life had already demanded more of him than most adults ever had to endure. His stomach growled painfully, the kind of deep, twisting hunger that made his small body shake. Still, he pressed his nose closer to the glass, watching as waitresses served steaming stacks of pancakes, burgers with melted cheese dripping down the sides, and tall glasses of milkshakes that seemed like treasures from another world. Inside, laughter floated through the air, silverware clinked, and the jukebox in the corner played softly. To Ethan, it felt like standing in front of a castle where he wasn't welcome, no matter how much he longed to go inside. After gathering courage, Ethan slowly pulled the door open. A bell jingled overhead, announcing his arrival. He stepped inside hesitantly, the warm smell of coffee and fried bacon hitting him like a wave. His voice was barely above a whisper when he asked the waitress behind the counter, "Excuse me, do you have anything left over? Maybe something you don't need?" His cheeks burned with shame as he said it, but his hunger overpowered his pride. Before the waitress could respond, a man stormed out from the back. He was tall, heavy-set, and wore a shirt with the name tag that read, "Rick, Manager." His face was pinched with irritation, and his tone was sharp. "What's going on here?" he barked, glaring at Ethan. The waitress looked uncomfortable. "He was just asking." "I heard him," Rick snapped, cutting her off. His eyes narrowed at Ethan, his voice dripping with disdain. "We're not running a charity here, kid. You can't just walk in here and beg. This is a business. Paying customers only." Ethan flinched at the harshness of his words. His throat tightened, but he tried once more, desperation breaking through. "I'm just really hungry, sir. I'll take anything, bread, even." But Rick wasn't interested in sympathy. His voice rose, drawing the attention of diners around them. "Out. Now. I won't have you hanging around here making customers uncomfortable. Go find food somewhere else." He waved his hand toward the door, his face twisted in annoyance. The waitress looked like she wanted to protest, but she stayed silent, afraid of losing her job. The boy's eyes stung with tears, but he bit his lip hard, refusing to let them fall in front of strangers. He turned slowly, his small frame shaking, and walked out of the diner, the bell above the door jingling again as though mocking him. He stepped back into the cold air, hugging himself tightly, his stomach aching not just from hunger but from humiliation. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. A few customers had witnessed the scene, whispering among themselves, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Rick brushed his hands together as though he had solved a problem and muttered, "Kids these days. Always looking for handouts." Then he disappeared into the back office, leaving behind a room that felt colder than it had just minutes before. Not long after, the roar of engines echoed from the street. The low rumble grew louder until it was impossible to ignore. Heads turned toward the window as a group of motorcycles pulled up to the diner, chrome shining under the afternoon sun. One by one, the bikes parked in a line, their riders cutting the engines. The sudden silence after the growl of engines was almost eerie. Then, boots hit the pavement. 6 bikers, leather jackets worn but proud, walked toward the entrance. Their presence commanded attention, tattoos, long hair, and a quiet confidence that made people instinctively sit straighter. The bell above the door jingled again as they entered, the air in the diner shifting immediately. Conversations died down, forks paused halfway to mouths, and eyes followed their every move. The leader of the group, a man in his early 40s with a thick beard and kind but piercing eyes, glanced around the diner before signaling to a waitress. "Table for 6, he said, his voice deep yet calm. The waitress nodded nervously and hurried to prepare a large booth. The bikers slid into their seats, laughing and joking with one another, but their eyes were sharp, scanning the place like men who had seen enough of the world not to miss a detail. As menus were handed out, the leader's gaze lingered on the glass door. Just outside, he noticed the small figure of Ethan sitting on the curb, arms wrapped around his knees, staring at the ground. The man frowned slightly, something in his chest tightening. "Boss, you good?" one of the bikers asked, noticing his distracted expression. The leader nodded slowly, still watching Ethan. "Yeah. Just, give me a minute." He excused himself from the booth and walked back toward the entrance. From inside the diner, curious eyes followed him as he pushed open the door and stepped out into the crisp air. Ethan looked up quickly, startled by the sound of boots on the pavement. His eyes widened when he saw the towering figure in front of him. The biker crouched down to meet him at eye level, his leather jacket creaking slightly as he moved. His voice was gentler than Ethan expected. "Hey, kid. You all right?" Ethan hesitated. Strangers had rarely been kind to him. But there was something steady and sincere in the man's eyes that made him feel a little safer. He nodded slightly, though his empty stomach betrayed him with a loud growl. Embarrassed, he lowered his head again. The biker smiled faintly, as if he understood without needing words. "When's the last time you ate?" Ethan's voice cracked as he whispered, "Yesterday. Just a piece of bread." The man's jaw tightened, anger flashing in his eyes, not at Ethan, but at the world that had put a child in this situation. He extended his hand. "Come on. You're gonna eat with us." Ethan's eyes widened in shock. "Really? Really?" the biker said firmly, his voice carrying a weight of promise. "No kid should go hungry." Inside the diner, as the door jingled again, Rick emerged from the back, frowning at the sight of the biker leading Ethan in. He strode forward, irritation brimming. "Hold on," Rick said loudly, his voice sharp enough to cut through the air. "That kid doesn't belong here. I already told him to leave." The biker turned his head slowly, his expression unreadable but his presence commanding. He placed a protective hand on Ethan's shoulder and replied in a calm but steel-edged tone, "He's with us now. And we're paying customers. You got a problem with that?" The diner went dead silent, every eye locked on the standoff forming in the center of the room. Rick shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the group of bikers filling the booth. He knew better than to push too hard, but his pride bristled. "I don't care who you are. This place has rules." The biker's eyes narrowed slightly, his voice lowering to something more dangerous than shouting could ever be. "Yeah. Well, here's another rule, real men don't throw hungry kids out into the street." The words cut through the air like a blade, and for the first time, Rick had no quick response. Customers around them exchanged glances, some nodding subtly, silently agreeing with the biker's words. Ethan stood there, torn between fear and hope, as the weight of the moment settled around him. For the first time in a long time, someone was standing up for him. The diner was so quiet that you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Rick's face flushed red, but his eyes flicked toward the booth where the other bikers sat. They weren't saying a word, but their stares were heavy, the kind that warned him not to push further. He swallowed hard, forcing a laugh that didn't sound genuine. "Fine," he muttered. "If you want to waste your money feeding strays, that's on you. But don't expect me to clean up after him." The biker ignored Rick and guided Ethan toward the booth. The boy slid in nervously, pressing himself close to the edge as if afraid he didn't belong. The men around him, though rough in appearance, greeted him warmly. One of them grinned and ruffled Ethan's hair. "Don't look so scared, kid. You're family now." Another called out to the waitress. "Hey, sweetheart, bring us the biggest stack of pancakes you got. And add bacon, eggs, hash browns, whatever will fill him up." Ethan's eyes widened as the orders piled on, each biker adding something more. Milkshakes, fries, burgers, even pie for later. He could hardly believe they were all for him. His hands trembled as he tried to fold them politely on the table. The leader, whose name the waitress quietly revealed was Dean, leaned toward him. Eat as much as you want. No one here's gonna judge you. When the food arrived, Ethan hesitated for only a moment before hunger took over. He dug in with a desperation that silenced the table. The bikers didn't laugh or tease, they just watched, some with soft smiles, others with clenched jaws, angry at the thought of a child living like this. Dean finally asked, "Where are your folks, kid?" Ethan paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. His eyes fell, and for the first time since he sat down, tears brimmed. "My mom passed away last year. My dad, he left before that. I've been staying with my aunt, but she says she can't afford to feed me much. I try not to complain." His small voice cracked under the weight of those words. The table fell silent. One of the bikers swore under his breath, shaking his head. Dean's hand tightened around his coffee cup until his knuckles turned white. He knew hardship, his crew all did, but to see it in the eyes of a boy too young to carry that burden tore at something deep inside him. Rick, standing behind the counter, rolled his eyes. "Don't let him fool you. Kids like that make up stories for pity." Dean turned his head slowly, locking eyes with the manager. His voice was low but steady. "You got no soul, do you?" The manager huffed, muttered something under his breath, and disappeared into the back. Meanwhile, Ethan kept eating until he could barely hold another bite. The bikers laughed when he leaned back with a small satisfied sigh, the first sound of contentment any of them had heard from him. Dean leaned in again. "Kid, you got a place to sleep tonight?" Ethan shook his head. "My aunt said I should figure it out. She doesn't want me there anymore." His voice was quiet, but the words carried heavy finality. That was enough for Dean. He looked around the booth at his brothers, each one nodding silently. They didn't need to speak, this was a family that understood one another without words. "You're coming with us tonight," Dean said firmly. "We'll figure out the rest later. But you won't be out there alone." Ethan's eyes widened. "Really? You mean it?" Dean smiled, just a hint of warmth breaking through his rough exterior. "Yeah. You've got people looking out for you now." The bikers paid their bill in cash, leaving a tip that nearly doubled the total. As they stood to leave, every head in the diner turned to watch them. Some customers smiled, some looked thoughtful, but all of them understood they had just witnessed something far greater than a meal. Dean placed his leather jacket around Ethan's thin shoulders before guiding him out. The boy clutched it tightly, the weight of it both comforting and protective. Out in the parking lot, the engines roared back to life. Dean lifted Ethan gently onto the back of his bike, making sure he was secure. "Hold on tight, kid. You're safe now." As they pulled away, Ethan looked back once at the diner, where the manager stood fuming behind the window. But then the wind hit his face, carrying him forward, and for the first time in a long while, he let himself believe tomorrow could be better. The bikes thundered down the road, the cool evening air rushing past Ethan's face. He held tightly to Dean's jacket, his small fingers gripping the worn leather as if it was the only anchor he had. For the first time in months, maybe years, he felt something close to safety. The flashing lights of the diner faded into the distance, replaced by the glow of street lamps and the blur of passing cars. After about 20 minutes, the group pulled into a lot behind a modest but well-kept building. The sign above the door read, "Brothers Haven Motorcycle Club." Ethan's eyes widened as he took in the sight of bikes lined neatly in rows, a mural of wings painted across the side wall, and warm yellow light spilling from the windows. Dean helped him off the bike and placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "This is our home, kid. And tonight, it's yours too." Inside, the atmosphere was completely different from what outsiders might imagine. Sure, the walls were decorated with photographs of rides, banners, and tools for repairs, but there was also laughter, the smell of food still lingering in the air, and a sense of belonging that could be felt immediately. Ethan was ushered to a couch while one of the men brought him a blanket, and another handed him a cup of hot cocoa. He sipped it slowly, warmth spreading through his body, melting the cold he'd carried for so long. "Kid, Dean said, sitting across from him, we've all had tough pasts. Some of us grew up with nothing. Some of us were tossed aside by people who should have cared. That's why this club exists, we look out for each other, no matter what. Ethan nodded, staring down at his cocoa. But I'm not like you guys. I don't belong anywhere. Dean leaned forward, his tone firm. You belong here as long as you need. You're not alone anymore. The word struck something deep inside Ethan. For months, he'd felt invisible, like he was drifting through life without anyone to see him. And now here were these men, strangers just hours ago, offering him more kindness than his own blood had. Later that night, after the boy had fallen asleep on the couch wrapped in Dean's jacket, the bikers gathered around. One of them, a tall man named Grady, spoke first. We can't just drop him back off. The kid's got nowhere. Dean nodded, his face heavy with thought. We'll do more than that. We'll make sure he's taken care of. Tomorrow, I'm talking to social services. I got a buddy who works with the county. If his aunt's neglecting him, they'll step in. The men agreed. But they also knew this wasn't just about paperwork, it was about showing Ethan that family wasn't always about blood, but about the people who refused to let you fall. The next morning, Ethan woke to the smell of pancakes and the sound of laughter. He blinked against the sunlight streaming through the windows and saw one of the bikers flipping food at the stove while another set out plates. Morning, champ, Dean said with a grin. Breakfast is ready. Ethan sat at the table, shy at first, but soon laughter bubbled out of him as the men teased each other like brothers. For once, he wasn't the hungry kid watching from the outside, he was part of it. Over the next week, the bikers kept their promise. Dean contacted his friend in social services, explaining Ethan's situation. His aunt was questioned, and it became clear she hadn't been caring for him properly. Arrangements were made to place Ethan in a safer environment. But the bikers didn't stop there, they visited him every day, bringing meals, checking on his homework, teaching him how to fix small things around the clubhouse. Word about what had happened at the diner began to spread around town. People who had been silent witnesses that day now told the story, often adding how ashamed they felt for not stepping in. And slowly, the diner's reputation changed. Customers began avoiding it, especially after hearing how the manager had treated Ethan. Eventually, Rick was replaced, the diner taken over by someone who believed no child should ever be turned away hungry again. As for Ethan, his life transformed. He was eventually placed with a foster family who worked closely with Dean and his crew, ensuring he remained connected to the men who had changed his life. He went from being the boy no one noticed to the boy everyone wanted to support. Years later, when Ethan was grown, he returned to that same diner, not as the hungry kid at the window, but as a young man with confidence and hope. Sitting at a table with Dean and the bikers, he ordered a meal and smiled. The waitress asked if he wanted to pay separately, but Dean clapped him on the back. Nah, he's family. Always has been. Ethan's eyes glistened as he looked around the table. He finally understood something that had taken him years to grasp, sometimes the family that saves you is the one you least expect. And to anyone who heard his story, the message was clear, kindness costs nothing, but it can change everything. The rude manager who threw out a hungry boy had tried to shut a door, but minutes later, bikers opened another one that led not just to a meal, but to a whole new life.